We're glad you're back with us on the Pastor Pod, and we're both here in the studio at one in Venice and one in the Orlando area. So if you're new with us, we're the Pastor Pod. My name's Josh, and I'm here with my good friend Jay, and we're in for another incredible episode today. If you are new, or maybe you've been with us for a while, we're so glad that you joined us for another episode. And today is going to be a lot of fun as we talk about our topic of stop dating the church. So Jay, how's it going? I know last week you filled us in on you guys moving and the fun and joy of unpacking boxes and waiting for your boxes to get there.
Right.
How's it going this week?
So I just gotta acknowledge I'm trying to get over the fact that you said we're in the studio, and like that makes it sound so much better.
Doesn't it sound exciting? It sounds professional.
You're in an office, and if you're watching on YouTube, you're gonna see that this is a different part of Josh's office. It's not like the fancy bookshelf.
Yeah,
Josh, it makes you look more hip, more down
Does
to
it?
earth. Less
I just have a marker
professional.
board and a drape over the
I think
windows.
it's a drape. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, we lease an office complex, so it's it works great for our church for all different reasons. But it's like an older, like just imagine
Right.
like the show The Office, like everything's just really basic and
So that's totally cool. that
random
you
random rooms.
live in the office type, and now my mind is
Yeah,
really
yeah. We basically work where they shot the show.
oh, that's fantastic. So
No,
it is a studio. It is a
no, I'm
studio.
kidding. I'm totally kidding. Right now, I'm
Uh,
on. They're videoing me right now. This is part of the.
yeah. Yeah, I see your microphone. I can see your microphone.
Just kidding.
And then I'm in a borrowed office. It's not even my office, but I'm at the new church where I'm serving at. And so,
Nice.
but yes, Josh, we are beginning to unpack the boxes. There's things on the walls now. It's beginning to feel like home. And I'm realizing all the work that I have to do to maintain the home. And can we just talk for a minute about how hot it is in Florida and why it's so hot?
Yes.
I'm this is my body has to acclimate again, and I've lived in Florida before, but my body's not ready for the heat yet. And so
Here's what I'll say: just always have a water bottle with you.
It's not even
Always.
a water bottle. It's
And
the
then just sweat.
t-shirts. I just need
Oh yeah,
t-shirts.
always
I gotta
have extra shirts.
Correct. I don't remember ever having to do that. And maybe I've gotten fatter, or I don't know, but like I don't know what it is, but it's like a 3-shirt minimum per day.
Yeah.
3-shirt minimum. So
Yep.
that's kind of where I'm at on.
Yeah. If you don't live in Florida, you just don't understand. Now it's hot everywhere. I've been reading reports of the heat all over the world, like in Europe, and it's just really bad right now, I guess. Of course, it's late July. I mean, this is like the hottest time of the year.
I guess.
But down in Orlando, Venice, I mean, we stay hot till October typically. Like it's.
Yeah.
I remember last year, December, like second week of December, we had like an 85-degree day.
Yeah, but that's okay. That's okay. Last year, I believe you guys were colder on Christmas than we were in Boston, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So it happens.
Yeah.
It does get cold. So whatever. Anyhow, Josh, all is well. We're in the studio today.
That's right.
I still can't get over that. But yeah, we're talking about dating the church today. And so it should be a fun conversation. And Josh, I think you wanted to share, and you want us to share a little bit about dating our wives. And so why don't you kick that off, Josh? Why don't you talk to us about your date? What was the first date with your wife like?
So me and Cassidy met in Bible college, of course, the same school we went to. And our first official date, I was a youth pastor, so we went to a high school football game in a little town in Georgia, right over the Georgia line. And the crazy thing, on the way there, I forgot like how to get to the restaurant. And this is before GPS was on cell phones.
Oh yeah.
So I had to call one of my buddies, Tim Flowers, and ask him like how to get to where I was going. So it was pretty embarrassing. She was just laughing the whole time, like, who is this goober? Like, he has no idea where we're going. We went to Applebee's. Like, I don't even like Applebee's. No offense to Applebee's fans out there, but I was like, hey, I was thinking like
really
Applebee's
likes Applebee's. So my wife really likes Applebee's. I don't. But
I didn't want to go somewhere like super nice and like freak her out that I'm like ready to ask her to marry me. But I also am not going to go to McDonald's and be like, you can have anything you want off the dollar menu, honey. So we had a great night.
Yeah, at McDonald's you could get everything you wanted, especially for. Come on,
man.
It was $10 for a meal at Applebee's. You could have got anything you wanted at McDonald's.
I mean, we could have just gone crazy at McDonald's. But at the end of the football game, it was a little chilly at that time of the year. And on the way out, you know, she's like, man, I'm cold. Like it's cold outside. And I'm like, is that a cue to like put my arm around her or like to give her my jacket? So I gave her my jacket, and then I
Oh,
put my arm around
nice.
her. And then it was awkward though, because I'm just awkward. And she started laughing when I did it. And I'm like, oh, sorry, I'll stop. And pull my arm back, you know? And then it was quiet for a little while in the car, but then we laughed and kept going. So she stuck with me,
You
and we're,
you
we're
are
14,
super super
and
awkward.
we're 14 years into it. And of course we dated for a couple of years, 2.5 years till we were married. But Jay, you told me not only your first date you said wasn't like, I guess, as
Now, don't say
awkward
this
or exciting,
publicly. Yeah, it
but
was fine.
I want
You
to
making
know
me out to
about,
be
no, you said
you made
like
me out to be like, if my wife
no,
listens to this, she's gonna be like, Jay, you said it wasn't
no,
exciting.
no, listen, Holly, it was he meant it. He was very romantic when he talked about it. But I want to hear the story of when you tried, your thought when you wanted to ask her to marry you.
Yeah, yeah. So dating brings out the awkwardness, and I think in every person, right? And you do
Yep.
some crazy things that you never thought you would do. For example, there was one time Holly and I were driving together, and we were in her dad's pickup truck. I borrowed her dad's pickup truck, and she was cold. All right, Josh, you were talking about being cold. So she turned the heat on. And I just told you guys a minute ago, I'm not a heat guy. Like I can last really well. So she turns the heat on like seriously as high as it can go, and she falls asleep. So what do you do in that moment? Do you turn the heat down? Because I started sweating. So do you turn the heat down or crack the window? What do you do? Because you want her to be comfortable and warm and cozy. You're trying to do all these things for love. And so I just suffered through it. And when we got to her house, she was like, woke up and she's like, oh, I feel so good. I was pouring sweat. Like you could wring out my shirt pouring sweat. And she looked at me and she's like, what is wrong with you? And I was like, it's hot. You do crazy things. You do crazy things. And
You do.
you mentioned about me proposing. I had this crazy
Mhm.
idea. Probably one of the dumbest ideas I've ever had. But I got with her friend and her parents, and I arranged this whole thing. And I got keys to her car, and she was at a friend's house. I drove to the friend's house, and I decided I was going to hide in her trunk. I was going to hide in her trunk, and I left a note on the window like a psychopath that said, pop your trunk before you leave. Now put yourself in her shoes. She comes out of her friend's house. It's dark outside. She looks at her window. There's this weird note that says pop your trunk before she leaves. I hear she comes out and then she goes back in and gets her friend. Luckily her friend's in on it. And she's like, just pop the trunk, Holly. Just pop the trunk. What kind of friend does that, by the way? What kind of friend tells her friend, pop the trunk? It could be it's going to be harmless. So she pops the trunk, and when she pops the trunk, I pop out like, hey, it's me, like a birthday cake, right? Hey. And she freaks out, like rightfully so. Thinking about it nowadays, I'm like, what was I thinking? And she starts running into the darkness. I try to get out of the trunk as fast as I can. I'm a big guy, so I kind of roll out, fall on my face. I'm screaming, wait, stop, it's me, it's Jay. She comes back crying as I'm on one knee, and I say, will you marry me? Now, I don't know if she's crying because she's like
Scared
terrified,
to
or
death.
if she's
Yeah.
like, this is an emotional moment I've been waiting my whole life for. I can't wait to tell my kids about this moment where their father hid in a trunk. So that's
That's
how I asked.
amazing.
So this woman said yes to me, by the way. So it takes great
Wow.
love to say yes to a man. And Josh, we're 16 years in.
That's
But
right.
the truth of the matter is this, and actually it's more than that, because we dated, Josh, we weren't as quick as you guys. We dated, I think, like 4 or 5 years. It was a long time.
Mhm.
So anyhow, you do crazy things. You do crazy things when you date. And I
You
think
do.
that's really
You
what we're
do.
getting at is dating is this, it's an awkward, but yet it's crazy at the same time. And
Mhm.
and today we want to kind of talk about this idea of dating the church. And I still think people do some crazy things when they're talking about dating the church. And I kind of want to unpack that. I think it'd be great to unpack that and talk through
Mhm.
that, because I think so many people fall into this category, unfortunately. And I think over the last 5 years or so, even more people have fallen into this
Mhm.
camp of almost dating the church. And it should raise a red flag. It should be cautious when it
Mhm.
comes to that. But I think we need to start by clarifying terms, because I think that's always important when you're trying to discuss something, is making sure we're all on the same page about what we mean by dating the church. And so, Josh,
Mhm.
you want to give us a solid definition, since you're the wise one. I was going to make a comment about your
I'm not a
bookcases,
wise one.
but you're not in front of your bookcases today. And so
I'm not.
I
So my
actually look like I have more of a clean office than you do, and
you
it's not even
do.
my office.
You
It's not my
do.
office. It turns out I'm not even going to have an office. I have a hole somewhere, like a closet or like a corner somewhere, but that's okay. Anyhow, Josh, clarify, what do we mean by dating the church?
I mean, dating the church is similar to a first date. People show up to the church, or maybe they've watched online. That's the new front door, is on the online website. But people come to the church and they'll even say, church shopping. They kind of say it sheepishly sometimes. We're just kind of checking out churches, and you're assessing if it's a good fit for you and your family. And there's nothing wrong with that desire to find a church, right? And it's not wrong, and it is important to ask questions about their theology. Is this church gospel centered? Do they preach the gospel? Do they believe the core values of the scriptures? That's not really what we're talking about today. That let's just say we're defining that as that's already a yes. This church does believe the Bible's inerrant, infallible, that they're living on mission, they make disciples. By God's grace, they're doing those things for God. But I think it's more of a mindset. If a person stays in that mindset, never commits to being in a covenant, membership. And when I say membership, not like a golf membership or you pay your dues and you get a couple things, but a mindset of being in a family, that you belong to the family, you participate, you contribute. This is your church. When you come to church, you don't just come to receive, but you come to serve. If you don't take that step, if you don't cross the line, you can stay there. Kind of like a guy that dates a girl for 15 years, and we've all seen it. The girlfriend is like, or even the fiance is just like fed up with him. Can we get married? And it's just, if you've ever known someone like that, usually one or the other are very, very miserable, and for whatever reason, they won't step over the line and marry and covenant and commit to being together. And I think that same truth kind of applies to church. But that's probably like how I would define or set up this conversation. What would you add, or what would you change?
So I'm listening to you, and I think that's fine. I think there's a lot of people. I think you're right on all fronts there, but I think there's a lot of people who still. I want to take it. I would even take it a step further. And the reason I take it a step further is this: is I think there's some people who can attend regularly, and really, what does regularly mean? Who knows what that means? It's such a, when I say regular and you say regular and someone else says regular, we're probably talking about two different times, right? I'm not saying that we're not communicating. You can't take on vacation, you can't miss a week, you can't, things like that. Things happen. But when you are a consistent regular, somebody can attend consistently. They can even come every week to church. They can drop a check in the offering box. They can, open up the app, give online, whatever way they give. They can give and they can attend. But I still think there's a borderline where that could almost be dating just as that. And again, I think there's a level here that the bar needs to be raised a little bit, because I think you think about dating somebody. You could go on dates. You could buy their meal. You can go on dates and buy their meal. But does it ever get beyond dating? And that's where the marriage comes. Is there ever a proposal? Is there ever actually a wedding that takes place? And so I want to say there needs to be even a little bit step further. It's not just about attending. It's not just about giving. Many times that's what people go to run to right away. It's like, hey, I attend every week and I give my check. I was actually talking to a couple this week, and it was kind of sad because they haven't been attending the church that they used to attend. And I was talking to the gentleman, and I said, do you still give to that church, or do you give to your new church? And they were like, well, we actually give to both. And he said, the funny thing is that church that we're not attending anymore, they've never reached out unless we miss our giving. Then they go, oh, it's everything okay. So I'm not even talking about that. I think you can give and you can attend the church, but you can still be considered dating the church. I think it needs to be a level more of what we mean by that covenant type
Mm.
of relationship. So why don't we, if we could, and this is kind of off cuff, it's not on our notes. We usually have notes put together, but what do we mean by coveting? What do we mean by that
Mm-hmm.
covenant?
Mm-hmm.
Josh, let's dive
Yeah.
into that a little bit more, because what does it mean to covet with a church, to make a covenant with a church? And I'll start by saying, giving you a second, because I threw this one at you
Mm-hmm.
last minute. It starts with this idea of a commitment, yes, but it's actually a mutual commitment of, hey, I'm going to really lean in, and I use the word ownership.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna really take ownership in this,
Yeah.
which means I know my responsibility. I know that I'm called not only just to attend, not only just to give, not only just to serve, but to be faithful in going above and beyond,
Mm-hmm.
being faithful to being a part of this. So you used the word family earlier, and I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
proper word to use, is family.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we think about family, um, there's no way, shape, or form. There's nothing that's ever going to stand in the way of me doing anything for my wife or my children, or even my extended family. Family takes on a whole new level, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really the direction we need to go when we start thinking about a covenant. It is
Yeah.
we've actually entered into a legal binding relationship, and I
Mm-hmm.
use the word legal binding even though it's not legal. But what if we considered it that way? What if it was
Mm-hmm.
that firm, where we were like, hey, this is a legal binding type of
Mm-hmm.
relationship, where until something happens where I'm no longer legally combined with this is it. This is my family. And that
Yeah.
means through the good times, that means through the bad times, that means when things get hairy, things get difficult,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still in it. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
walk out. This is
Not
my
gonna walk out.
family.
Yeah.
I think that's what, I mean, we really need to lean into the seriousness of what it means to make a covenant with
Mm-hmm.
a church. What would you add to that?
Well, there's a lot that's been lost over these, I don't know, maybe last 10, 20 years. Like we're so consumeristic that we don't want to sign the waiver. I mean, I've even had people over the years that struggle when they walk through our membership class, or, just saying, hey, I'm committing to be a member, and I'm it's got the 5 key statements and what we've kind of covered. And you're just saying, hey, I'm all in. And, I think over theologically, when we're saved and baptized into the family, that's really our spiritual membership into the church. But there's a level of, have you committed to be a part of a local church family? And are you willing to say, this is my church, and not bounce around town and use churches for all the programs that they have? Now, we should all share and be collaborative with other churches, but at the end of the day, do you covenant to be with a local family where you are, like you said, you own it? Like, this is your church. You are the church. You don't just go there. You don't just go when they have something special, but that when someone speaks of the church, or there's a need that arises, you are on board to meet a need. You're there to help set up, tear down. If you're a portable, church plant situation, you're willing. You don't just look at it as a place or religious goods and services.
Religious
But yeah,
goods and services. Yes.
but that's kind of that's how our culture
Right.
has been developed. And so I think you covered a lot of it, Jay, but I would say you have to get to the point where you say, I'm going to commit to serving, and I'm going to support the leadership. I'm going to pray for them. I'm going to be an encourager. I'm going to be someone that connects people when they come into the room. When people are in the community, I'm going to be inviting. I'm going to be prayerful. I'm going to pray for staff, for the people, the prayer requests. And I'm just going to be fully engaged. I'm not going to be half-hearted. I'm not going to be, well, we'll see how it goes. And if some conflict happens or there's an issue, you don't just go peace out right away. You actually take the time to give the benefit of the doubt and seek to find unity. And there are times that you have to go to another church, or you move, and that's okay. I'm not saying, you can only go to one church your whole life, but the purpose of the local church is to be a family on mission, serving God together, not just a place I go and to be fed and just to receive, but also to give.
Right. And I think it's really important because you mentioned earlier you were using the illustration of, somebody who won't commit, somebody, that fiance or whatnot, they won't commit, they get frustrated,
Hmm.
people get hurt
Yeah.
when there's the dating goes beyond what it needs to, right? Sure, there's a season where you're maybe checking out, making sure the theology aligns, make sure things like that. There's going to
Mhm.
be a short season. That season needs to be as
Yeah.
short as possible. But people get hurt when you continually just date the church. So, what are some of the biggest consequences you've seen associated with this dating mentality, especially when it comes to church? Who gets hurt? And then, what are the consequences that come along with that when somebody is
Yeah.
just constantly lives in that state of dating?
Well, you just become unhealthy. You will see the church as you're indifferent. Your heart's not going to be in it. Typically, you won't give financially. You won't serve, or maybe you'll serve a little bit, but then you're looking for something wrong. Typically, when you're in a consumer relationship with anything, a product, a restaurant, like if you go somewhere and you are expecting like this perfect service, then you go to Yelp, you go to Google, and yes, those things help, and it's not wrong to share reviews. But if that is your mindset, like if you take a world mindset and apply it to the church and go, I am here to critique, and if they mess up one time or they don't do something just right, I'm out. You'll never be healthy as a follower of Christ. And
Mhm.
so the body of Christ is not just a time of the week, although we need to gather as a family, but it's a people we belong to. And I really think there's two categories, right? Consumer or contributor. And I think we all consume, like we all have to consume things, like that's just part of our life. We're all consumers. I need to eat, you need to eat, we need water, we need food, we need houses, we need gasoline, whatever it is. But if I stay there spiritually, I'll never grow in maturity. So moving from a consumer to contributor, um, here's a couple examples. I come to church to get fed. That's how a lot
Right.
of people view church. I come to church to assess, did I like the songs? Did I like the sermon? Did they have enough humor? Did they talk about the Bible enough? I mean, there's a checklist in everybody's mind. Or do I come to church to not only receive and hopefully be encouraged and find spiritual growth, but did I come to serve? It's kind of like the boiling pot versus the pitcher illustration, right? Where we fill up a boiling pot to make some spaghetti. It's made to stay in the pot. It's made to be contained. And a lot of people view receiving at church as I need to get filled up. But if there is not a pouring out like a sweet tea pitcher or a watering a plant out in the garden, we are called not to be filled to keep it in, but we are called to be filled to then pour it out. And so when we choose not to be fully involved as a member of a church, and when I say member, you can use all types of words for that, right?
Right.
Partner, member, whatever you want to use. But ultimately, when we choose not to be fully involved in a local church, we can miss the power of spiritual growth, maturity, and really finding real family and real support in our life.
Right. And it's sort of like a DTR, right? You got to define the
Mm-hmm.
relationship. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the struggle. Think about, again, go back to the idea of dating. And Josh, I've been in predicaments, especially, in my teenage years where, a girl and I, we'd be hanging out, we'd be laughing, we'd go out to eat, we go things, but we've never really, there was a point in time where I don't remember, I'm going to date myself a little bit, where like, like, hey, I'm going out with so-and-so, right? There was
Yeah.
actually we got to
Mm-hmm.
define this, like, you're my girlfriend, I'm your boyfriend, we're in a
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
And until that ever happened, it was kind of like, I don't know where we stand. I don't know where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where people get hurt, because maybe one person thinks on one side, you can think easily, oh yeah, that's my girlfriend. But I never said that. We never thought we were girlfriend. Oh, we're not going out. We're not dating. Oh, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what happens in a church is you end up with that kind of mentality. You have maybe
Yeah.
people in the church who are going like, well, yeah, you're part of the church. And then, but you're not really, you haven't really committed. It's this idea of like, we haven't really defined. Now,
Mm.
what makes this relationship a dating relationship, which any healthy relationship is wherein two people are actually, both working together on the relationship. They're both contributing to the relationship. That's why with any partnership, membership, whatever you want to call it, covenant relationship within the church, it's a two-way relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have a responsibility as a member, a partner, a faithful follower of Jesus, to that, committed to that church, and that church has a commitment to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes it a covenant relationship. the two are working and tangibly together. When one is not doing that, that's when people get hurt.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important that we have conversations like this, because what we don't want is a lack of defining that relationship. And I think a lot of, speaking from the pastor's perspective, I'm just going to go out there and speak for pastors all over. Defining that relationship is really, really important, because it helps a pastor know how to shepherd, we want to shepherd everybody. We want to come alongside everybody. But if you're not interested, imagine me pursuing a girl who's like, yeah, we're friends. I'm in the friend zone, but we're not really that committed. Right. And that gets awkward really quick, doesn't it? And we know it gets awkward. And you've been on maybe the receiving end of that. If somebody coming to your door thinking you're closer friends than you really are, and you're like, okay, this is not what it needs to be. And so I think for pastors, we need to know where you stand. I think it's important that you make it really, really important that you take the time to identify and allow the church that you're going to know where you stand. And one of the ways you do that is by committing to the church or not committing to the church, so that pastor knows where you stand. Again, a pastor's heart is to shepherd everybody. They want to. They want to love you. They want to come alongside of you. They want to support you. They want to be there for you. But they don't know where you stand until you define the relationship. I think it's really important that you do that, because until you define that relationship, you're expecting either you're going to get hurt, the church is going to get hurt. Pastors get hurt all the time. I talk to pastors all the time. They get hurt by people who, well, I thought they were in. I thought they were totally in. And then all of a sudden they're gone. Well, no, they weren't in. They weren't in to begin with.
Well, I think too, with that, like if you are a church member and you do leave your church, leave well.
100%.
Go, if you have a chance, share, hey, we're going to be moving on, but we want you to know we appreciate, whatever, you could fill in the blank. You don't have to do that, but at the same time, show honor. One thing of the pastors in my area, we've all committed together when we've met, saying, hey, if someone leaves our church and goes to yours, number one, we're never going to ask someone to leave their church to come to ours if they're in your church. And if there's a problem, we're going to talk to each other. I mean, I talked to a pastor this week, and someone in need and this family that needs help, and we both talked about how we're both going to help. And although they're going to a different church now, or one side's at this church, we're going to come together to support them. But as a shepherd, like you're saying, it's hard. And then vast majority of people in America, when they leave a church, they never say goodbye. They never say thank you in any way. They basically take their ball and go to another basketball court. And sometimes it's shinier and or whatever they're looking for, it has it there. But I will say, if you have left in an unhealthy way, and you return to the same church you left, and I've seen that quite a few times, there needs to be a time of healing and forgiveness between whoever there was conflict with. And I've sat through and led those conversations quite a few times. And so, because the church is a family, and I know that you might say, well, what about the big churches? What about, how do they even know? I've been a part of really the gamut, Jay. I mean, you've been around it. I've seen in every church, it hurts the same. If you're aware of it and you're in relationship with people, it's the same feeling. And I do think as shepherds, pastors, we need to be willing to, this isn't really like our conversation today, but I feel like it's just coming out. But I do think how you leave, how you join, and how you work through conflict in a church should be treated as a relational approach. And as pastors, we need to model it. But if you're a church member, you should also understand that pastors are human beings. We're not robots. I even had a lady once, we talked, and I kind of shared something that had hurt me in my life, and she didn't know how to respond. Like, she literally felt like, for whatever reason, that normal things that bothered her maybe not bothered me as much. And we should be mature. I get all that. But pastors have feelings, church members have feelings. And so to honor one another, that's why the commitment's important. That's why when we talk about membership, there should be a process. There should be teaching, clear roles. What's the church's part? What's the individual and family's part? And if we don't know that, then that does cause a lot of issues, because everybody thinks membership, they think all types of stuff, right?
Right. And again, I think it's important that we come back here and go, okay, so we're talking about commitment. We've talked about that a lot. We're like, hey, you should be committed. You should be. What does that look like, though? What does commitment look like?
Yeah.
What does it even look like to be committed? And I've used lots of different phrases and things, but I think ways that you could really square that way is using your time, talent, and treasure, right? The time,
Mm-hmm.
talent, treasure. And there's multiple categories that go in that. Those are three big buckets, right? But
Mm-hmm.
you think about your time, right? There's an investment of time when you are engaged in a relationship. Josh, think about when you were dating Cassidy and you were like, hey, I want to woo her. I want her to marry me. There's time commitment to that, right? There's dates,
Oh yeah.
there's spending time with them.
Mm-hmm.
There's doing things that you necessarily maybe not want to do at the time, but you're going to do it because your spouse really, you really want to be there with your spouse. Like I was rode in that hot car for an hour sweating. Why? Because that was my time. I was giving it. I was willing, right? I was willing to go do that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was miserable, I was willing.
Mm-hmm.
Your talents, right?
Mm-hmm.
You bring something to the table. You
Yep.
do. If you are attending a church, you are not there by accident. Paul tells us and gives us that beautiful picture in First Corinthians as a body. You have a role to play. I truly believe that when you enter into a church, if you make a covenant with that church, there's a space on the body that is lacking in that church that you're supposed to fill.
Mm-hmm.
You are there for a purpose. God has put you there for a purpose. All parts are important. I've said this before. No one wants to be the big toe, but every church needs a big toe. So go be the big toe if that's what you're supposed to be. Go be that person using your talents. And then so time, talent, and treasure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the finance piece that no one really likes to talk about. Churches always
Yeah.
all they care about is your money. And that's not true at all. Jesus cared about your money. Jesus cares about your money and what you do with your money. And it's really, really important that you are somebody who's faithful with the treasure that God has given you. And so it's just time, talent, treasures. How I would do that. Josh, what about you? What would you say when it comes to the commitment part?
Yeah, I think it includes being in a community, being in a small group.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a church grows larger in worship, it needs to grow smaller in groups, grow larger and smaller at the same time. That's something we're going to really be talking about this fall with our church, just understanding that the church wants to continually reach people, but at the same time, just as importantly, we want to grow and develop small groups where people can be cared for, grow spiritually, and also serve others together. I think another element is that you are saying, I'm going to be under the authority of the leadership of the church. I'm going to be willing to follow. Now, that doesn't mean blindly follow. It doesn't mean to follow the leadership if they're unbiblical or if there's inappropriate things happening. That please understand that. But you're saying, I'm going to serve with, support the pastors, leaders, elders, and be a support, be an encourager, and come to them with issues and struggles you're going through and let them help you and serve you and build you up. I think that's another piece of the church that is just so powerful. When that happens, it's so much joy. There's so much joy when the leaders humbly serve and shepherd and the people are willing to follow, but also give ideas and lead. And we empower them as leaders, equip them, empower them to serve in their giftings. And I think what you said is huge. Every church is wired. Every church is a body, and every one of us has a part to play. And when we're not playing that part, it really hurts the church. I mean, Paul, we can go deep into that, but the church is hurt. And then if you don't use your talent, like Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, it goes unused, and God will say, okay, well, I'll take that and give it to someone else. He takes it very serious that we invest what he's given us with our, like you said, time, talent, treasure. In the local church, and that's where to me that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where there's the joy of not only relationships, but also it's like when you're on a really good sports team, and not just athletically, but unity and teamwork. When you shoulder up together and you serve and support. I don't know. That's just for me always such a cool illustration because I do anything for those guys and they do anything for me. And that's really the local church is a band of followers of Jesus that are on mission together. And we're unified together, not on our preferences, not on the little wants and desires that we all want, because we're not going to make everybody happy on every little thing, but we are unified that we're going to make disciples. We're going to love each other like Jesus. And we're going to hopefully see the gospel change our community and change our world And if that's the driving factor, I think all of these things will fall in place. If it's
Right.
built around a consumeristic, I go to church because there's people there that are like me, or it's on this side of town and I don't have to drive 7 minutes and not 12. If it's all built on just peripheral, American, like first world problems, you'll never find the joy of what it means to be a part of a local church. But if you get down in the nitty-gritty that I'm here to serve and love people and see the gospel just explode in my area through my life and others, and I'm going to serve and pray for, and I'm going to give sacrificially, and I'm going to learn to trust God with my finance, all that stuff. That's where the rubber hits the road. And I think that's where the contributor heart comes in, and the consumer starts to hopefully be eked out. And we have to fight it, right? It comes back all the time. But when that happens in a majority of the people in a local church, watch out, because that's when God will pour out his favor. And I think that's when the church starts to multiply. And through that heartbeat, lives are changed. And then the giving and the serving and the gifts are just exploding. And that's how the early church did it. It wasn't like a huge programmatic thing. They just believed the word. They were devoted to one another, and they believed the gospel, and they told everybody about it. And they loved people. And if people in every church can understand that's the church, it's not a time of the week. It's not a style of service. It's not just who's preaching. It's not just like, hey, what programs do they have? And let's talk about programs for a minute. If you go to a church just for programs, you can actually do the program and miss relationship. You can actually do all those things and truly miss true church community. And so programs are only helpful when they create a culture of relationship. If it is just a program-based church where there is no true relational connection, it will lead to a lack of life change. And so just busyness in the church, just doing a bunch of events, just doing things to keep people busy, doesn't equal spiritual maturity. So that's something anyway, that's a whole other podcast.
That's a whole nother podcast. But I think what you're getting at here is right. This commitment factor goes well beyond. So again, I'm going to go back. I don't want to over banter the illustration between a husband and wife and dating, but there's this concept where even when you do get married and you commit to your spouse, there's a honeymoon period.
That's right.
And the honeymoon period is amazing. It's great, right? You can never do anything to make me mad at you, right? But that honeymoon period eventually goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the commitment comes in, where you understand the biblical responsibility that you have. And I think that is what we're getting at today is like, yes, you can go to a church. It's all great. Everything's amazing at first. And then the longer you're there, you get in and you go, okay, I'm not really sure I like that too much. Well, that's when you commit. That's when the commit goes, hey, I'm in this though.
That's right.
Here.
Yeah.
I'm in
I'm
this
here
community.
to improve. I'm here to help.
I'm in this. I can be part of this, right? We're going to do this together. And what would it look like if you were a member for 14, 16, 20 years at a church?
Yeah.
What would it look like if you were a faithful member, giving your time, your talent, and treasure for 16, 20 years? What could you do in a community? What could you do in the life of a church if you're that committed to a church? I had a church just reach out to me not too long ago. Now that I'm back in the state of Florida, I'm gonna do some preaching outside of just where I'm at here at Church of South Lake, and it's in the Panhandle. It's one of the churches I served at, and they're like, "Hey, we want you to come preach for us. Could you come preach for us?" And it turns out there's a lot of faithful members that are still there. When I was a youth pastor, I've been there.
Wow.
We were in Bible college, but they're still there plugging along. And that church is actually seeing some amazing growth and some amazing things. But it's because of the faithfulness of people for 10, 15, 20 years, just plugging along, doing it through the good times and the bad times and the hard times, getting through that. So when you go to a church and you're going, hey, I think we're going to commit to this church, knowing, no, I want to just warn you, there's a warning sign here. There's going to be a honeymoon period where everything's going to be fantastic. But when the thick of it comes, when difficult times come, when there's a challenge coming, or you're faced with the difficulty of like, should I do this or should I, remain committed to the church? Be reminded of your biblical responsibility to be a part of biblical community. You're a part of a family. You have a responsibility, a role to play in that church. So I would say that's what commitment looks like. It's going beyond, above and beyond just the feels, the butterflies in your stomach on those first few years of a marriage.
Dating.
Right. It's a commitment. It's a marriage kind of concept where you're really covenanting with a church, a local church body. And so, Josh, we're doing this podcast. We're talking about this, and maybe someone's listening and they're realizing I might be falling into this category where I'm just dating the church. What would you say, Josh? How would you go about going? What do they need to do? What's the step that someone needs to take? Because in love, we don't want anybody to walk away going just being discouraged from this podcast. We want to encourage you. So in what ways would you encourage someone who's listening going, I might be falling into that category of dating? What would you say to them?
Number one, I'd say write out a list of the questions that you need answered to be able to make a decision, right? Like any decision you make in life, it's great to list it out and say, okay, what are the things I need to really figure out if I'm going to be part of this local church? I mean, everybody probably had a list, or I've heard a lot of people have a list whenever they pray for their future spouse, who they hope they'll be and that sort of thing. But make a list of, okay, what are the non-negotiables? Like, what are the key theological truths? Like, if you have kids, I mean, they need to have a focus on building healthy families, whatever that is. And then you need to ask the question, am I expecting perfection in these areas? Or am I expecting these pastors, leaders, these people in the church to be perfect? Because anytime people get involved with anything, it's going to be imperfect. And that includes us as leaders. I know we all agree with that, but I don't think we always believe it. I think we go into it, like you were saying, for that honeymoon period, say, oh, well, everything Sunday morning looks like, man, they got this thing perfectly going. And it's like, no, we're still working. We're still trying to make it healthier and focused on the gospel. And then thirdly, just commit, jump in. Don't wait for it to be perfect. There's never a perfect time to get married, and there is never a perfect time to have children. Believe it or not. You're never fully ready.
Nope.
Just
if
say,
you're waiting,
I'm gonna jump in.
We'll have children when we have the time. Never gonna have enough time.
Yeah, we're not gonna have. And then when you have kids, you won't have time.
Right. We're gonna have children. We'll have children. We can afford it. You can never afford it.
You'll never afford it.
Exactly. So that's just a horrible right. Here's what I would say.
What would you add?
I would say if you're connected to a local church right now, and you get your list going, you're like, these are the reasons why I don't know if I can fully commit to this church. I would say, number one, could you have an open dialogue with someone on the staff at that church about that? Don't just jet, like you were talking about earlier. There needs to be a healthy conversations. If you're a pastor listening and you get someone who comes to you and says, hey, I don't know if I can commit to this church because of this. Could you be kingdom minded and faithful enough to go, okay, I get it. Those are valid. I understand that. Here are some churches, some good gospel believing churches in the area that you could be a part of. I used to say from the platform, right? All the time, look, this may not be the church for you, and I get it. And that's okay. But let me help you find a church. Why? Because I value people being in a covenant relationship with a local church.
That's right.
I want people to be a part of the church I'm a part of. Absolutely. 100%. But I realize it doesn't always work that way. And I get that. But let me help you connect with another local church. Let me help you connect. And if you're driving 2 hours here, trust me, I can find a closer one.
Yeah, and that's key.
Where you can invite your coworkers to, because they're not going to drive 2 hours with you. That's the key. Is you can go somewhere you like, but you're not doing. And this is a whole nother podcast as well.
That's
a
whole
living
podcast.
On mission then, because someone's not going to drive 2 hours.
And they're not going to go to small group, and they're not going to be in a community because they're too far away. They never see each other at the grocery store. There's no connection throughout the week. That's a whole nother. But hey, I will say, I had one guy. I'll kind of finish talking after this. But I had one guy come and we had planted the church, and he was just really upset with the music. He was a little bit older, but he just didn't like the new music. He just said, we need to do the old hymns. And I said, man, I love a lot of the old hymns. I grew up on those. And sometimes we throw those in, and there's some different ways we've updated the sound. And I appreciate your input. And he said, no, really, like we need to do like you. And I looked at him and I said, if you really, really are impacted by hymns. I said, to be honest with you, we're never going to be the best church at that, because we're leaning to reach the next generation. I said, but you know what? I'm friends with the pastor at so-and-so down, over on this street, and of this church, and they have a full choir, they have an orchestra.
Right.
Man, I really think that would speak to you and probably fit more of how you want to reach people. And he said, I've never had someone you're basically telling me that I should go to another church. I said, no, I'm letting you know that I want you here. But the vision's not up for grabs for everybody to have their like a preference. I said, but I hear you and I appreciate that. And I have an honoring spirit towards that. But our church is really focused on how do we reach people in this generation that the music they're going to plug into their car on the way home with their family.
Right.
And I said, and if that's for you, hymns, great. And I love them. And he ended up going there and getting connected, and it wasn't weird or hard, but like it took the pressure off. I didn't have to look around and go, how do I try to meet everybody's preferences? So if you're a pastor, take the pressure off and help them find a place that fits their preferences.
There are
especially if they're consumeristic.
There is churches with different expressions of the gospel.
That's right.
Everywhere.
And they all are awesome, and they're making a difference.
And they're needing the big toes. They're needing the arms. They're needing all those parts. It's just everybody else is. And you may have somebody who just doesn't really connect and will never really connect to your church. Hey, give them, so it's okay. This is kingdom minded. We're all on the same team. We're all trying to do the work together. So I would say, if you realize you're dating the church, do what Josh said, answer those, make a list of those questions you need answered to why you can't commit. And then have an open dialogue with somebody on the staff of that church and say, hey, these are the reasons why. And maybe you're missing something. Maybe there's a miscommunication. Communication is key in every relationship, not just your marriage, not just your dating. Communication is key in every relationship. If there was more communication within the church, we might actually be able to accomplish even more, right? So that being said, have an open dialogue and conversation. And then from there, either commit to that church, jump in, commit to that church, or work with that church staff to find a place where you can truly commit to the local church. So at the end of the day, what we're saying, Josh, is just dating for the sake of dating is unhealthy. And it is time for, us as a church to really step up and say, hey, it's time to commit and do the real work that we're called to do, and own our responsibility and be a part of a local community, a local church body, and let God do the rest. Let God handle the rest.
Yeah.
So good. Good conversation. I want to encourage you. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us, thepastorpod@gmail.com. If you're looking for more other episodes, we've had some great guests. We got another good guest coming on in the weeks to come. We got more guests lined up. We've had some great guests in the past. Go check us out, thepastorpod.com. You can find all the past episodes. We're on Anchor and Spotify and Apple iTunes. We're all over the place. Just find The Pastor Pod. We'd love to hear from you, but listen, from Josh and I, we look forward to each and every week with you. Thank you for tuning in this week. We look forward to seeing you, or at least chatting with you next week here on the Pastor Pod. Have a great weekend.